Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, namaskaram, salam alaikum, ni hao, talofa, greetings everyone. Welcome to this second and final webinar of Meet the Ethnic Women Candidates New Zealand Election 2020. We're going to spend the next hour talking to women candidates contesting in this year's elections who identify as ethnic, and ethnic in this New Zealand context is defined as those who are non-Māori, non-Pacifica, and non-Pākeha. Let me start by introducing myself and my co-hosts. I'm Priya Kurian. I'm Professor of Political Science and Public Policy at the University of Waikato. And my co-hosts are Rachel Simon Kumar and Erica Lee. Maybe we'll start with you, Erica. A quick word of introduction.
Kia koutou. I'm Erica. I'm currently teaching and researching in the Department of Sociology and in community health at the University of Auckland. And
our fellow co-host is Associate Professor Rachel Simon Kumar from the University of Auckland. I do want to begin by just assuring our audience and our panelists that we are really very conscious of the fact that there's a leaders debate starting at 7:30 today. So our plan is, even though we've had a late start, is to finish by 7:25 p.m. So you will have time to have a stretch and get a drink before that debate begins. Let me just start by providing a little bit of an introduction to the theme and focus of today's webinar. There is an unprecedented and growing spotlight on ethnic minority women in Western liberal democracies. We've seen record number of ethnic women enter, for example, the US House of Representatives, most notably and most recently, the four who are known as the Squad: Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and Ayanna Pressley. The Democratic vice presidential candidate in the US currently also is an ethnic woman. She identifies as Indian and Jamaican, and that is Kamala Harris. In the United Kingdom, we have Priti Patel of Indian origin, who is the current Home Secretary, and we have Diane Abbott, a British Jamaican, who was the shadow Home Secretary until earlier this year. So across a number of different countries, we see ethnic minority women becoming a significant presence in politics. In New Zealand as well, we can see a small but significant opening up of the political arena to ethnic women. Until about a decade ago, few ethnic women contested for parliamentary elections, and even fewer succeeded. But in 2017, we had 5 ethnic women who were elected to parliament. And this year, from our very rough count, and so this is not it's not a verified number, but there are at least 19 women candidates who claim an ethnic identity. What do ethnic women politicians bring to New Zealand politics? How difficult or easy is it to be one? How do they shape their politics around their party's priorities, their community's interests, and also their identities as women and possibly feminists? What can we expect from ethnic women in parliament? And how might their presence benefit ethnic women in the community? The Ethnic Women in Politics webinars running yesterday and today aim to discuss precisely these questions. Yesterday, we had a conversation with 4 dynamic and inspirational first-timers vying to enter parliament. Today, we talk to seasoned ethnic women politicians who are either standing for re-election or running for a second time. And these webinars are part of a 3-year research project funded by the Royal Society of New Zealand Marston Grant that looks at barriers to and opportunities for ethnic women to enter politics in New Zealand. As university-based researchers, our webinar debate is going to be a little different from what you may be used to watching on television, particularly anyone who's watched TV this afternoon. Some of our questions may be considered provocative, but we are not looking for interruptions or point scoring. Our aim is that these sessions help to bring a more informed understanding of issues facing ethnic women. So let me just start by going over some webinar protocols. Rachel and I will start by asking questions, which we will share between us, and we anticipate this will take about an hour. And that will then give us about 15 minutes for a Q&A with questions coming from the audience. Now, for those of you who may be new to a webinar kind of functioning, here are some clarifications. Because this is a webinar, we cannot see the audience, and neither can the audience participate verbally to the discussion. There is a Q&A box. You can type in your questions into this box, and this will be seen by us as co-hosts. You can ask questions anytime during the webinar. You don't have to wait until the end, and you have the option of asking your question anonymously. We will put forward a selection of questions to the panelists depending on time. Just a note to the audience, do make your questions brief, ensure they're questions, not commentaries, and focus on the broader issues, not really the personalized ones. And Erica will ask some questions on your behalf. To the panelists, we do have quite a range of issues that we will want to raise with you, and therefore brevity is encouraged. And just as a reminder of time, Erica will raise a banner with the image of a clock. When you see it, please be ready to wrap up your response in 30 seconds. And a final comment, in order to progress smooth conversation, we are, with your permission, panelists, we're going to dispense with titles and surnames, and we will address you by first name, and please feel free to call us by our first names. And with that, I hand over to Rachel to introduce the panelists.
Kia ora tātou, Rachel Simon Kumar. I'm at the School of Population Health at the University of Auckland, and I do want to start with an apology that Priyanka is still not in as a full panelist. I am waiting for IT support, and I hope that will change in the course of this evening, and very soon at that. Meanwhile, I am delighted to introduce our panelists for today, names that are possibly already familiar in the political landscape in New Zealand. We have firstly Goldis Gahraman, Member of Parliament from the Green Party. She was born in Iran. She's a lawyer by training. Goldis is the first ever refugee to be sworn in as MP in Aotearoa. She has an emphasis on advocating human rights issues and has worked for the United Nations tribunals. She sits on the board of various NGOs such as Action for Children and Youth Aotearoa, and her most recent accomplishment is her autobiography, Know Your Place, which was published this year. Anne Deagapala is a Member of Parliament for the New Zealand First Party. She was born in Fiji and is of Gujarati heritage. Anne arrived in Aotearoa in 1990. She's the first Indian woman president of the Waitakere Ethnic Board and is a founding member of the Auckland Council Ethnic Peoples Advisory Panel. She has held various executive positions in the corporate sector over the years. She has a strong focus on equity and ethnic diversity in communities and has served West Auckland for over 20 years. Dr. Paramjit Parmar is a Member of Parliament for the National Party. Paramjit is the first Indian-born woman to be a Member of Parliament. She is currently the spokesperson for Research, Science and Innovation for the National Party and sits as a chair of the Education and Workforce Select Committee. Paramjit holds a PhD in biological sciences and prior to Parliament has worked as a scientist, a businesswoman and a community advocate. Our fourth panelist today is Priyanka Radhakrishnan. She's a Member of Parliament for the Labour Party. She was born in Chennai to a family from Kerala, and very impartially may I say that's a great state. Priyanka grew up in Singapore before moving to Aotearoa. Prior to working in Parliament, she worked as a social worker serving the Indian community in Auckland. Priyanka is a proud union member with a focus on community-led decision-making and sits on various committees, including Foreign Affairs, Defence and the Trade Select Committee, and organizations such as the National Council for Women in Auckland. Welcome to you all, and thank you for joining us today. I shall kick off with the questions. Yesterday, we had the panel with young ethnic women, and the question that we asked was something identical to what I'm going to ask you. So, do you see yourself as an ethnic woman, and what does that mean to you? And let me frame that. An ethnic woman, as I use it here, is almost as a political category, a political identity, different from being just ethnic or just woman. So the question to you is, do you see yourself as ethnic or woman or ethnic woman, a bit of both, none, all of the above? And what does that mean? Shall I start with with Paramjeet, please?
Oh, thank you. Can I first thank you, Priya Korean, Rachel, Simon Kumar, and Erica Lee, and also want to acknowledge Royal Society for the funding. So really good to be here on the panel, and also want to acknowledge other panelists on this debate. So for me, yes, I'm really proud. I'm really proud of my heritage. I'm of Indian origin. I'm really proud to be ethnic, really proud to be, I mean, for being a woman, I haven't done anything special. So yes, I'm really proud to be an ethnic woman, but I don't get up in the morning and look myself in the mirror and go, oh, actually, I am an Indian woman, because I consider myself to be an individual. But when it comes to having the understanding of ethnic communities, having the understanding of ethnic women, that is the voice that I am in the national team. And I do make sure that the voice is there in the House as well, in Parliament as well. So coming from ethnic background, being a woman of Indian origin, we do have, special cultural issues where we need to be aware of. And it's my role, I consider, to make my colleagues aware of these issues that need to be taken into consideration when we are discussing policy matters. And hopefully I'll be able to elaborate on this later on. Thank you.
Thank you. Goldris, would you like to start? And I'm just going to take, I think, an IT call. Just a minute.
Yeah, kia ora koutou. Likewise, I'd like to acknowledge the panel and this platform with a focus on ethnic women in politics. It's invaluable. Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that politics has really taught me is that I do see myself as an ethnic woman, but to some extent, and in some rooms and on some stages and platforms, it matters less how we see ourselves, and it really comes home to us that our communities are experiencing our identities as ethnic people, and in particular women, because it's imposed upon us. And I think in particular as a Middle Eastern woman from the so-called Muslim world, I've sort of learned that I'm either taken as being something other and dangerous and oppressive, or I'm taken as being liberated from my culture. So I find myself quite often referring back to the feminists and feminism from back home, where I learnt, that equality movements exist and are very staunch in my culture as well. And so I'm constantly representing Middle Eastern women in a way that I hope is empowering, but I know that it's sort of really important to my communities, and in particular refugee and ethnic women who are not always given the credit that we deserve for the strength and our sort of perceptions that we bring to every job, I think.
Thank you. Priyanka, are you able to join us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh,
we can
good.
hear you clearly.
Good. Kia ora koutou. As the others have said, thank you for the opportunity to be on this panel, and to those who might be watching or watching later as well. Just to go back to your question, I think I've always been acutely aware of being both from an ethnic minority background and a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And, in a country where you are from a minority group, I guess it's a little bit also about intersectionality for me. It's a little bit of a double whammy in a sense, and in spaces where you are constantly the minority, whether that was back when I was working in the NGO sector and dealing with various agencies where I was often the only brown woman voice, championing issues of domestic violence that specifically or disproportionately affect women from ethnic minority communities. I was always aware that I was often a lone voice, and that there were specific barriers that you faced when you were in that position. And the same goes in parliaments as well. We are few and far between, in our own parties as well, let alone across the board in parliament. So I guess my answer to that is yes, but it's partly from a cultural diversity, heritage background, but it's also about the power imbalances and the fact that there are structural inequities that I'm sort of acutely aware we face differently and need to be challenged.
Anne, over to you. And Priya, could you please take the next question? I'm just sorting IT out. Yeah.
Thank you for bringing us together. Sorry, I need to correct something which was said earlier. I am not an MP in Parliament. I am a member of the New Zealand First Party and our second term candidate running for these elections. I don't know whether Wellington is my route at the moment or ever was. But when I first came to this country, I didn't know what ethnic was. I was a woman only, and I worked with the University of Auckland, so I just felt there was equity and everyone was equal. However, this is where I learned where racism was. Institutionally, I didn't understand it. But when I joined the women's movement is when I started identifying myself as someone who was not in the system, was outside the system. And over the last 2 decades, I've changed my way of thinking because when I first realized that funding and systems were divided, that's when I said, well, I am an ethnic woman and I will have a voice for the democracy in this country. I want to be heard. So therefore, now I identify myself as an ethnic woman leader, and that is where I have input in a lot of boards as an ethnic woman, because I bring diversity, I bring a different perspective on issues. So I'm really proud to be an ethnic woman in, vying for public office right now. Thank you.
Thank you. And some of you have already touched on this a little bit, but I want to explore it further. Would you describe yourself as a feminist, and what does feminism mean for an ethnic woman politician? Especially in the political context of New Zealand. So maybe we can start with Goldrees and then go to Paramjeet and then Anne.
Yeah, I absolutely consider myself a feminist, and I see myself as kind of having come from a long line of feminists, and my parents' fight back in Iran as being a lot about gender equity, and I think it looks different in some of our cultures as what it looks like in sort of Western second wave, third wave feminism. We didn't have that mirrored back at us, and I think we sometimes get taken as non-feminists. My mother always says she'd feel naked if she left the house without red lipstick on, because that was her suit of armor, as against the very oppressive Islamic regime that told her to be colorless and shapeless and desexualized. And so the patriarchy looks different there. So feminism has to look different, and I think as a result, women like her can be undermined when they interact here as feminists. And so, it is, I see it as part of our job as women who have a platform, who are ethnic women, to consider what feminism looks like for us. And a lot of it is about socioeconomic rights. Once we've moved, we have our civil and political rights in a formal way. And, Priyanka touched on this, it sometimes is about resource. Sometimes it's about being given an equal platform, but not being listened to. And so we have to fight, you get to be a UN lawyer, but if you're the sole member of what could be a victim class, is that systemically fair? And in Parliament it's very similar. It's sort of, our issues are not resourced in the same way. Our community's issues are not sort of mainstreamed in the work. So we often have a lot more to do, but and they are women's issues. The gender pay gap is only $6 between a Pākeha woman and the average man, but the next tier is Asian women, and that's defined broadly, including South Asian, East Asian, and that's 18%. So, and Māori is 20 and Pasifika is 23%. That's a world of difference. So, our issues are intersectional, and it's important that we're feminists, I think, as a result.
All right, so I'd like to address this question in two layers. The first one is about being a feminist overall, and second, bringing the ethnic component into it. So when we talk about feminism overall, yes, I am a feminist, and I really believe in equality, gender equality. And when we talk about gender equality in New Zealand, normally what we mean is it's the economic side. It is about making sure that, you know, women are able to earn the same amount of dollar for the kind of the job. So when we talk about this is the Equal Pay Amendment Bill, which was going through Parliament. So that kind of equality is normally talked about, the gender pay equality. And we also talk about conscious and unconscious kind of biases. So this feminism, in my view, is slightly different from feminism that we experience in our own countries. Like I've come from India. And let me share this with you. We have 4 daughters, we have 4 girls, and I'm the oldest. And I remember, you know, when I was growing up, when my 4th sister was born, and, you know, friends and neighbors came to see my sister. And actually, you know, instead of expressing happiness for another child coming in the family, they were sitting there and actually, you know, expressing sadness that, oh, it's again another girl, a 4th girl. So, and when we used to go around, you know, usually people will ask, okay, how many brothers and sisters do you have? And when I used to say, oh, I have 3 sisters, and they used to really frown upon 3 sisters. So you have 4 girls. And I used to say, yeah, we have 4 girls. So that brings that additional component of feminism in me. This is about social equality. So I really believe that socially, women should be seen equal to men. So we should be seen as somebody who is able to get that respect that men get in society, get that kind of affection and love in you know, families that usually men get in some families. And I'm not saying it still exists in all families. Yes, people have, some people have changed, but there is a mindset still that could be existing in some families. So I'm really actually wanting to see that that mindset doesn't continue. So it's about not just about economic equality for me when I talk about feminism, it's also about social equality. And obviously domestic violence is another component in there, but that's only just one component in this feminism, you know, kind of word, how I see it personally.
Thank you. For me, equality is about feminism, right? And I want to quote a journalist feminist. Her name is Gloria Steinheim. I don't know whether you've heard of her or not. The story of women's struggle, she says, for equality belongs to no single feminist, not to any one organization, but to the collective efforts of all who care about human rights, end quote. So I'm not going to be burning my bra again, you know, and yelling, I'm feminist. I am an activist for women. I care about women's issues, you know, but I want to see a collective driven by all women for other women, because I feel that in numbers we have power. And when we empower women, and that all women are strong women, we know that, right? Paramjit had just said, you know, coming from India, coming from Fiji, my mom was a really strong woman. She was Patani, so, you know, with that, from Afghanistan, you know, her roots, that's where I get my genes from. And I think, you know, the strength was developed in me through my dad, because we didn't have any brothers. You know, I was the firstborn in the family. So for me, if I'm achieving something, I'm not going to be saying, yeah, I am a feminist, that's why I'm trying to do this, because I believe everyone's got the strength of being a strong woman. A feminine, yes, I am feminine, but I'm also like a grandma, you know, a sister, a wife. So that's where I am stuck with. I don't know whether feminist is sticking well with me right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Priyanka, would you be able to come in and respond to that question on, oh, in case you missed the question, it was, do you describe yourself as a feminist, and what does feminism mean for an ethnic woman politician, particularly in the New Zealand context?
Priyanka is on a call with the IT person from the university, so I don't know whether she's actually able to hear the question. She did, however, send me a text with just a short message saying, I am a feminist, definitely. I'm sure she'll come back on and she will explain that in a minute. But shall we move over to the next question? Until then, some of you are on a political spectrum that on the one side could be considered to be the progressive left, and others are on the conservative right. Do you think that this distinction describes your political interests? This is where you should be sitting. And if so, why? What has drawn you to that particular end of the spectrum?
If I could start?
Yes, and
well, my political aspirations and experiences were born of a vision that originates from service to all. And there was a time when I was invested in being politically left. But right now I'm sitting in the center of the Nations Party, which is the New Zealand First Party. And it is solid. Sitting in the center, it is a centrist party, and it can work with anybody. So it can work with the right, it can work with the left. With my socialist leftist background, it gives me enough ammunition to be able to sit in the center and be able to grasp what's happening in the right and what's happening in the left. I'm not far-righted or far left. I'm sitting very solidly in the center with New Zealand First.
Thank you. And Paramjit, would you like to follow up?
So for me, it's my values, the values that I was brought up with. One of the values that I was brought up with was personal responsibility. This is, making sure that you're able to grow up and become a person that is able to take personal responsibility for yourself and your family and your loved ones. And other than that, it's equal opportunities that I really believe in. So these are the two core values that I really believe in. And National Party, to me, believes in these two core values, that is personal responsibility and equal opportunities. So for me, as an immigrant, if I see other immigrants, when I'm talking to other immigrants, we have come from thousands and thousands of kilometers away to New Zealand. Like I have come from India. And, people sometimes wonder, what was the reason for you to come, thousands and thousands of kilometers away from your home country? Obviously, there is a reason. We are driven. We are driven by this interest of doing well for ourselves and well for our families. And that's why we leave our home country and come to a new country where we believe that our aspirations will be fulfilled. So for me, I believe we all, immigrants, no matter which part of the world we have come from, we have come to New Zealand to fulfill those aspirations to do well. And I believe that as a politician, as a member of parliament, it is my responsibility to ensure that we are able to provide those opportunities to people to further themselves, to get those opportunities and fulfill those opportunities here in New Zealand. And partly, yes, we have to have personal responsibility and we have to provide for equal opportunities. So that's my reason I'm a national member of parliament.
Thank you. Kōrero.
Yeah, I was going to go before Paramjit to give her some material about tax to laugh at me about, but yeah, I consider myself to be on the left side of the political spectrum, but I'd say progressive rather than left. And I think it comes back to values as well. So I completely agree. We have all, as migrants, have moved for whatever reason because we're driven. And, for my family, it was to get out of an oppressive situation that was threatening to us and for political freedom. But I remember arriving here and my family constantly, my parents pointing out all of the different ways that this place was better. And, some of that was the social safety net, we were taken care of because we needed it at that time. There was public health care that's free. There's public education that you could just attend, and all children were equal. If someone was sick, it didn't matter that they were rich or poor. That wasn't up for sale on the free market. So that baseline equality, for me, that sort of ideal of egalitarianism is what New Zealand is, and why all of our other rights were able to be fulfilled. You know, can you really say that you have a democracy and the right to vote if you haven't had access to a quality education? And can you say that you're educating kids if they're hungry, if they're living in cold, damp homes and suffering from the kind of respiratory illnesses that we have on the rise here in New Zealand because of the housing crisis? So that's what it means to me to kind of share resources equally, and it ties in with the Green Party ethos of treating the planet as it is, which is a finite resource. We can't sort of pillage it. So we share the resource that we have in a fair way, and we make sure that everyone has access to what they need, because also we can't afford to kind of burn fossil fuels forever and drown ourselves in the rising oceans.
Thank you for that. Priyanka, are you with us?
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
We can hear you clearly.
Okay.
I'm so sorry we don't have a visual for you.
Yeah, that's all right. I've tried a few different combinations and permutations, but it doesn't let me into the panelist group, which seems to be the problem.
Right.
Yeah.
The question to the panel was, where do you see yourself sitting in the political spectrum? Are you on the progressive left or the conservative right, and why so?
Oh, I'd definitely say the progressive left.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I totally believe that we exist in a collective and that we need to collectively remove barriers so that people can get ahead.
Mm-hmm.
I also believe that the state has a role in doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess that's why I would say that I come from the center left and the progressive side of things. Yep.
Thank you. Do I have time for one more question of the panel, please, to the others? Yep. What is, here's a question that I have for you. How strong is your party's record in championing ethnic women as candidates within your party? What have they done in the past 3 years to actually encourage ethnic women into party positions and into leadership? And shall I start with Paramjit? You.
Sure. You'll remember Pansy Wong, Honorable Pansy Wong. She was the first ethnic woman to become a minister in New Zealand, and also, you know, that she was a national member of parliament. So National Party has been quite good at understanding the changing demographics of New Zealand. And also, as I said before, it's about equal opportunities. If people are interested, if people have the background, if they are keen to be in politics, National Party has been there for them. And after Pansy left, now we have several ethnic candidates. As you acknowledged in the start, it's a real privilege and honor to be the first Indian-born member of parliament here in New Zealand. So that opportunity came through National Party. And obviously I joined National Party only because my values aligned with the National Party. And you have spoken to another, you know, wonderful ethnic woman yesterday on your panel. She's a National Party candidate in one of the South Auckland seats. So within the party does understand that, you know, we need to represent this current New Zealand. And for that, obviously, we have to see who comes forward. So we don't believe in a quota system. I personally don't believe in any kind of quota system. It's not like we will have 2, 5, or 6 ethnic women or ethnic men or ethnic people in the party by a certain time. It's not like that. It's all based on ability. And I truly believe in selecting people and people coming forward based on their ability. Because as soon as we get into the trap of quota system, already, you know, women sometimes feel like they are second-class citizens. We don't want them to really then feel, because they are coming through quota system, that they are there only to, you know, fill that position because of that quota. So it has to be purely based on ability. It has to be based on interest. Thank you, Eureka. And so I think National Party has done really well.
Thank you. Priyanka, would you be able to respond next?
Yeah, sure. I think we need to actually move away from that false dichotomy of ability versus spaces, because we have no dearth of able women or women of colour who can get into various levels of leadership. However, I think we need to absolutely have a plan to get there, because talking about it for decades hasn't worked. And I think that's evident across parties. For us in the Labour Party, we have had a target for women more broadly, we've had a 50-50 target, and we're achieving that in the 2020 election, fingers crossed. And if we do poll on election day the way we are now, we will have 3 additional women of colour in our caucus, and that's Dr. Aisha Verrill, Vanushi Walters, and Nacy Chen. All women who have excelled in their fields, hold their own in any space, and will add value, I have no doubt, in the political sphere as well. So for me, I absolutely do believe in targets, and I'm proud that we have had one. We have also had a plan to achieve that, and that goes to the heart of your question in terms of what we've done over the last few years. We've revived the sector that we have. So our party is structured in a way that we have different sectors that, I guess are mechanisms through which policies that disproportionately affect different groups get through to our wider party mechanism and manifesto. It's also a mechanism through which people from different sectors get supported into positions of leadership within the party. And I believe we needed that to get to the point that we are now. So there's been a concerted push, there's been a concerted acknowledgement that the House of Representatives must be truly representative, and that's from a gender and an ethnicity point of view. We've worked towards that. We've had wonderful women who've mentored women of colour coming through as well, and we'll see that on October 17th.
Thank you, Priyanka. Goldris?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to kind of see that dichotomy still coming to a fore, because we know, you know, in New Zealand, the first nation to give women the vote, we're still not at 50-50 political representation, and that cannot be because there isn't that many women who are as good as men who come forward. So we absolutely need to acknowledge that substantive equality within us exists, but we need to mentor people and bring them up, and actually political parties need to reach out and assume that our values exist in every single different community. But I think it's also, for me, and the reason I'm with the Green Party is how authentically the Green Party has supported my voice. So it's about that kind of stepping away from that tokenistic way of having ethnic candidates or ethnic women merge into the party apparatus, speak only with the voice of everybody else, and kind of only attend our sort of ethnic gatherings, where I've, throughout this one term that I've had, have ended up quite often being, well, when we had the sort of the hate speech anti-racism rallies, I was always the only candidate that would be, or the only MP that would be there. When the Indian community had their constitutional protests against the latest reform, I was the only MP that was there. When we protested, you know, white supremacists coming to speak in New Zealand, it keeps going, but it's that thing of being able to be supported and authentically speaking to our own issues as well, because the point of representation really is that sometimes we're going to say things that that won't have been said before, and is the party going to support that? And I think Green MPs, whether they've been of ethnic background or not, always caught my attention because they would turn up to refugee protests, for example. So it's kind of shaping the culture of politics as well for me, and that's why I kind of trust the Green Party to represent ethnic women.
Lovely to see you, Priyanka. I'm glad that you've been able to come through on the webinar.
Yeah, thank you. IT person works magic. So thanks.
And Anne, your response to the question.
So I believe politics is about the art of possibility, yeah? And everyone can read in this country. Most people can read. Most people who are democratically invested in this country, or feel for this country, feel for the systems of this country, can reach out to parties. For many years, I was with the Labour Party, and then it was a strategic move by myself to be part of a party that had they were not going to come to me. So it was my responsibility to go to that party and say, hey, I want to be part of this. So I think we have the opportunity. If you want to change things, you know, things are difficult. To be an advocate is difficult. To be in politics is complex. But I feel that if you want to bring change, and you want to be heard, then you go, you go and enter into things that are challenging. And for me, that is important. Don't wait for someone to ask you. Go and say, I want to be part of this. And see, you know, the world is your oyster. You can reach maximum effort. You know, your efforts will be doubled if you go out and say, I want to be part of something that I felt all this time was not possible.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. And now I shall pass it over to Priya to carry on with the questions.
Thank you, Rachel. So much in terms of what you're saying, that, you know, there's room here for this conversation to go on much longer, but I'm going to just momentarily maybe start with a focus on international politics in a sense. You know, as ethnic candidates, potentially as people with connections in your communities and so on, how do you balance your connection to international politics with your party's position on issues? I mean, for example, do you think your party is sufficiently critical of human rights violations in a range of countries where many of our ethnic communities hail from? So we could look at the current situation in India, in China, in the Middle East, as in Palestine and Saudi Arabia. I mean, the list goes on. So maybe we can, you know, we can start with this, a response to this question, and let's go to Golriz for first response.
Yeah, kia ora. I'm also the foreign affairs spokesperson for the Green Party, so it does fall on me to lead on those issues, which has been fun. I'm also the defence spokesperson, which meant that, you know, one of my priorities was getting New Zealand's troops pulled from Iraq and Afghanistan. You know, and I came to that table, that, you know, negotiating table, as a Middle Eastern woman who had experienced war in the Middle East. Having to have that conversation with an ex-army man, you know, and New Zealand First Minister, it went well. It took a year and a half, but we pulled the troops and realigned the work of our defence forces to focus on climate crisis. And we've got this minister saying climate crisis now, and so, you know, but I think it meant something to bring that identity to those negotiations and to talk from that perspective. We, you know, and I just touched on, you know, having attended and spoken at the protests against the Indian constitutional changes, and we've been very loud on Hong Kong. We have a very long-standing kind of kaupapa of standing for refugee issues, which means addressing what causes refugees to become displaced, which is war and a war industry. So, you know, being able to say that Western powers profit from war is important to me. You know, being able to say that New Zealand needs to divest from those war industries. You know, in the last couple of budgets, we've set aside some $32 billion to spend on machinery and vessels that I don't think we need for the work of our Defence Force, which is essentially monitoring the oceans and disaster relief. But they have war-making technology, and those same companies then go off and cause what has displaced me in the world. So it is really important, and it's really important to say, you know, we need to be an independent voice on the global stage. We need to call out Donald Trump's America when he cages asylum seeker children, in the same way as we call out China when they massively breach the rights of Hong Kongers. And at the same time, look out for the kind of racism that criticism will fuel here for our, let's face it, East Asian community, you know, because it's not, the people hurling abuse don't distinguish between Chinese or Korean or whoever else. But to say, you know, our Chinese community here in New Zealand don't want to see those violations either. They've moved here to get away from it. To kind of stand with the Uyghur population, to acknowledge that, you know, New Zealand's independent voice and my voice, you know, in this free country is really important to utilize in that way. So it's long-standing green kaupapa. I found it easy and very, very empowering.
Thank you, Golriz. Maybe we can go to Priyanka next.
Sure. I think from a foreign policy point of view, New Zealand has always had an independent policy. We have always raised issues. We've, been known to speak our minds and speak truth to power. I guess the way in which we do it might differ from party to party, perhaps. The most recent trip that I was on, and actually we got back just before the borders shut, was a trip to India with our trade minister and our foreign affairs minister. That was my first, the first opportunity, I guess, that I've had to see what happens at bilateral meetings. I've heard what's happened. I know from the Prime Minister that she raises issues, whether it's with her Australian counterpart or Indian or Chinese. She's done that at every stage when there are issues to raise. So I know that that happens at various levels, but I've never actually seen it happen in play. And it was quite interesting to see the different levels of bilaterals that take place when ministers travel. That's just a little bit by the by, but I guess the point that I'm making there is that they are raised, and I'm comfortable that they are raised. So there is a little bit of a narrative that we're a bit scared to raise issues because our trade we're a trade reliant nation, and we rely on those relationships for trade. However, I have seen that these issues are raised. For me, though, as a woman of color, I guess, it's been a slightly uncomfortable space. I'm going to be quite honest about that, because I come from a very different context. I've worked in the NGO space for many years, the NGO sector for many years, so I don't have an issue about speaking truth to power or pushing for change, advocating for change. But for me, I don't want to be seen as just an Indian MP. And so I'm a New Zealand Member of Parliament. I'm here to look out for New Zealanders and the welfare of New Zealanders. So for me, I find that space slightly fraught, frankly, because I do believe that as a country, we need to call out human rights abuses. And I feel that we do that. I don't necessarily feel that I personally have to do it, though, because I feel the minute that I speak about those issues, people think that I'm speaking about them as an Indian woman. I'm not. And for me, so with the issue with Kashmir, for example, my focus there was the fact that I had people from the Muslim community who were contacting my colleagues and I, saying that we've got our elderly parents there, we can't contact them because of the shutdown. That for me is an issue, because that is an impact of foreign policy or decisions that other governments take that, to be frank, is up to them. It's up to them to take whatever decisions. Whether I disagree or agree really holds not a lot of weight from my point of view, frankly. Does our government speak up? Yes. But for me, at the level that I work at, as a new Member of Parliament, as the Parliamentary Private Secretary to the Minister for Ethnic Communities, those communities here in New Zealand are my primary focus.
Thank you. Anne, can we go to you, and then we'll end with Paramjit.
So the last 3 years of the coalition, three-party coalition, meant whatever New Zealand First wanted and Labour wanted or the Greens wanted, it was decided as a coalition. So all the achievements that, as Gaurav mentioned, the defence was an achievement of a coalition government. The New Zealand First Party had the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And he's been quite open about Taiwan. He's been quite verbal about Hong Kong, about trade. So I think he made impact internationally with Australia. I think when we had issues with the Australian convicts, not convicts, what do they say? The people of Nauru and all of that. There was a considered effort made by the coalition. And like Priyanka said, like people will say to you, why aren't you marching for India? I've got family in India, but should we intervene there because, we are exporting to that country? So let's let the ministers handle it. As Priyanka said, the Prime Minister did some wonderful work. We need defense because we had a mosque that, we had people killed in this country. And that wasn't derived locally, it was internationally. Somebody came from another nation and did that to us in our country. So why won't we increase defense? You know, looking at what's happening overseas. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Paramjit, you have the last
Yes,
word.
thank you. So before I address this question, I want to very quickly say one thing about the previous question about quotas. So I think some panelists were confused between targets and quotas. They're totally two different terms when you talk about targets and versus quotas. So coming to this question, obviously New Zealand has a very important role in my view to play in international peace. And if there are any human rights issues, New Zealand should be a strong voice, and it has been a strong voice. And when it comes to any issues that are raised, obviously we have portfolios given to different people within the team, and the person who has the foreign affairs portfolio, it is their responsibility to raise it. And if it is a higher level issue, then obviously the leader of the party, or when we were in government, the Prime Minister raised those issues. And a very quick example of that I would like to give you is when a coup happened in Fiji. And I think New Zealand was quite clear. We wanted to see democracy restored in Fiji as soon as possible. So there are issues which we consider important and where we raise our voice, and that is important for us to do. For me as a member of parliament, I believe that my responsibility is to be part of the team where the views are supported and understood from each other, and I'm able to provide any information or any knowledge that is needed because of my background. But other than that, I also believe that my responsibility is to people, ethnic people here in New Zealand. So how we treat people coming from different countries here in New Zealand definitely has an impact on our international relations. And here I would like to give an example. For people, obviously, ethnic people, many of them, they will go back where they come from, they get married there and bring their spouse from that other country to New Zealand. And the minister in the current government, Labour government, Shane Jones, he said that people should be actually living together before they are granted a visa to come to New Zealand. And I raised that concern, and yes, raised in different media, because he claimed that he had a role in changing that policy, that people should be living before they are granted a visa to come to New Zealand, which is not culturally appropriated in Indian culture. So later on, the government backtracked, which was good to see. And so these are the kind of issues where I think I have a bigger role to play. And in my view, as I said before, how we treat people coming from different countries definitely has an impact on our international relations. And that's where I think we can do really well to maintain our relations and improve our relations. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, that is interesting to hear, because it is clearly a fraught area. And I think you negotiate, we have party policies, which can be empowering, and we also have constraints in negotiating with the diversity within our communities. Let's move to something a little different. The first part of my question is really requires a yes or no response, and then I'll ask a couple of follow-up on that. So the first question that I want to ask you is, are you seeking the ethnic community's vote? And if you can just indicate with a yes or no, that would be great. Maybe we'll start with Anne.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. Paramjit?
All communities.
All communities. Okay.
That's not a yes or no.
Yes.
I'm a politician, Anne.
so shall I take that as a yes?
Sorry, did that come to me?
Ulrich, yeah.
Oh, yes.
And Priyanka.
Sure, particularly the progressive left within the ethnic communities.
Okay, so going on from there, I want to ask you to tell us, why should ethnic women vote for you? What is your understanding of ethnic women's issues, and what do you think your getting an ethnic woman's vote will do for them if you get into parliament? So let's start with Goldrees.
Yeah, it's really funny when people talk about women's issues or ethnic issues. because it generally means that a Pākeha man will decide what your issues are and then go out and consult with you. And then there's no guarantee that your input is going to be taken into account. All issues impact on us. We experience housing and roads and education and healthcare and the justice system as ethnic women, which is why our representation is the most important thing. Our actual partnership in policy making, our participation, our representation on corporate boards, in politics in every way, in media. So I think that has been my focus, is to make sure that the voice that I bring to Parliament is a voice that's authentic and it feeds into every policy area. But I guess I would say voting for the Green Party is to vote for equality in New Zealand to be kind of addressed in a really substantive and transformative way, because we're the only party that has really detailed, costed, transformative policies on poverty, on housing, and then also addresses what I think we all love about New Zealand, which is the natural environment. So whether it's energy, whether it's transport, we bring those things together to the table in a way that kind of puts people and planet first.
Paramjeet?
Yeah, so I would say that identity politics is something that we need to be really careful of, because for all communities, what matters is what various political parties and candidates offer to them. And I would say to each and every individual, whether they're ethnic or non-ethnic, to analyze us based on policies that we offer and based on what their needs are, to decide who they should be voting for. So yes, there are sometimes, natural inclinations towards voting for women might like the women, and ethnic people might like ethnic people. That is a natural human tendency, and if that is there, that is great. But other than that, I would say that for any immigrant person, for any ethnic person, the first thing is to have a job. And the second thing is, obviously, once they have found a job, is to see that they are able to provide for their family. And they need to analyze policies which are able to offer that. And I believe National Party is the party that offers for aspirations of all ethnic communities, including women. And for me, it's not about identity politics, it's about what we offer, and we should be judged based on what we offer, not based on our ethnicity or our gender.
Thank you. Priyanka?
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to start with where Goldray started, because you're absolutely right. Everything affects us. Issues around being able to access a decent healthcare system, having a job that pays a decent wage, housing, the education sector, all of that affects us. There are some issues that disproportionately affect us as well. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to pick a couple of those and speak to those. Issues around inequality. So income inequality, for example, and the one, I met an elderly woman last year. She was in her early 60s, Indian woman, who told me that she'd worked with this company, big multinational company, for about 26 years on the minimum wage. So issues, and increasing the minimum wage. In the face of opposition in Parliament, we increased the minimum wage even through COVID because of women like her. And that affects women from our communities as well. Paid parental leave, pay equity. That's the one massive change that we've achieved in this term to ensure that women are paid better in female-dominated sectors. Closing the gender pay gap, all of that affects our women as well. Domestic violence, so that's an area that I've worked in for many years, and I want in the next term for us, and I will continue to work with Jan Logie or whoever is in that position. I'm proud that for the first time we have a position in the executive that's specifically focused on ending family and sexual violence, but there's more to be done there for our women. We've made forced marriage and dowry abuse illegal, but there's so much more work that needs to be done for that to be realized as benefits for our women, and that's work that I want to I want to do, and that Labour will do in government. And then there are issues around discrimination, whether it's hate speech legislation, abortion law reform that we've championed, issues around identity and multiculturalism. And I'll end on the point around authenticity and having an authentic voice. I can't be all things for all ethnic women, and I don't claim to be. And so I'm incredibly proud that, you know, a party vote for Labour will ensure that we grow our caucus, and there are more of us in there who can champion these issues, who have the experience in their work, in a party that has a plan and strong, stable leadership to realise that plan. So that's why ethnic women should vote for Labour.
Thank you, Priyanka. And Anne, let's...
So key issues for women are still economic, social, cultural, and a little bit of it is political, because for those who aspire to public office. However, in saying that, I think we still have discrimination, institutional discrimination, pay gaps, you know, for ethnic women. We still have a lot of family violence, and I'm surprised that with, you know, with the Minister of Women sitting in the Green Party, we still 1 in 3, you know, 1 in 3 women. I've been working in the sector as well, and the figures have not changed. We haven't moved from 1 in 3. There is no political will to change the way women are being treated in this country. We've seen social media attacking the Prime Minister, attacking the leader of the opposition. So, you know, these are some issues that we must together, you know, collectively get, and I hear what Priyanka is saying. She's not there just for ethnic women. That's a given. You know, you're a representative, you're a public servant for all people, all women. But at the end of the day, you realize who you are. You've worked in the sector for so long, and what advantages have you brought to your community? This is the reason people are voting for you, because you identify with them, and they give you your voice. They want your voice in Parliament, and I think, you know, the Minister of Ethnic Affairs this year has done some wonderful work. So I congratulate you know, the effort that she's put together with the Office of Ethnic Communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. I'm going to hand over to Erica to ask questions of the panelists on behalf of the audience.
Kia ora, thank you, Priya, and thank you to all the panelists. I've got one question for each of you, and they're all different. So I'll just read them out first, so that while one person answers their question, the rest of you can kind of mull on the answer for your particular question. So for Gores, your question is, what have you done for ethnic women that you are really proud about during your time in Parliament? Anne, New Zealand First has a strong anti-migration stance, and particularly people from countries like Asia, Middle East, and Africa. How would you justify this policy position of your party? Paramjit, as ethnic women, do you think it is important to improve government relationships with Te Tiriti o Waitangi and Tangata Whenua? And Priyanka, is there allyship among ethnic women politicians, or do your party differences make that impossible? So quite punchy questions, and from the audience, we'll start with you, Gores.
Yeah, kia ora. I'll touch on 2 things. And one of them is something that Priyanka just touched on, and I think is really important for us to come back to as a panel that's talking about our sort of ethnic women participation in politics, which is the hate speech law reform stuff, which was a campaign that I launched sort of 6 months into being an MP, because of the experience that I had when I first announced my candidacy. And it's wild, because we know that prejudice exists sort of, you know, in our world, but to see it come to the fore when one of us stands up and sort of is loud and is visible is really something. And I spoke about it in my maiden speech to Parliament. I didn't feel like I could stand up in Parliament and talk without talking about this experience of just this barrage of hate, and it included violence, you know. And 18 months later, we had the Christchurch shootings happen, and it still sends chills down my spine to know that, you know, I talked about threats of gun violence in my maiden speech just because I was presumed to be Muslim, let alone, and we know this stuff is race-based and we know it's gender-based as well, and you know the Prime Minister also receives the same, and once we had kind of this issue come to the fore, it's just been so incredible to have that partnership with our Labour ministers as well, where, you know, finally I could have that conversation with the Minister for Justice in a way that he could also kind of see it, and it often does take someone who's experienced it to bring that to the table. And then once there was a public event that was so violent that we all stopped, you know, I remember having that conversation with him and him sort of saying, we're going to lead on this, you know, don't worry. And we did. And the Prime Minister has, you know, been involved in the Paris call. And we know that for young women, it's not about me and it's not about the Prime Minister. It's for our women online, just trying to participate, just trying to have discussions online and then running as candidates. We have to make that space safe. You know, that's our responsibility. We can't just tell them to be more confident and break the glass ceiling, knowing how unsafe it is for women like us in particular, that it's not equal, it's not an equally safe space. So having that review done now and knowing that, you know, we'll do more to bring it into law next term is amazing. And then I'll just very quickly finish on the FGM bill. So we brought together as women from across the House, and Priyanka was one of the sponsors of this bill, I was another, and we had Jo Hayes from National and Jenny Markroft from New Zealand First. We co-sponsored a members bill that was driven by ethnic communities, banning all forms of female genital mutilation in New Zealand, and it was wonderful to give voice to that activism of our communities as women of colour across the House.
Kia ora, thank you. Anne?
So New Zealand First stands on a strong platform for all New Zealand. As a matter of fact, you know, somehow we're sort of thinking if COVID hadn't arrived, what would have happened to our figures? We have no immigration right now. And on the platform of saying we want the best, the cream of other countries to come into this country, people who give to New Zealand, not take from New Zealand, is what our immigration policy is about, right? People can translate it to say, you don't want us, but which other country is opening their borders to everybody else? We haven't got enough infrastructure, we have got no housing, and our own welfare, our own super. It's first for New Zealanders. You know, who is suffering right now? The vulnerable people, the Māori, the people of this land are suffering. Yeah, we welcome people who want to give to New Zealand, not hop in here, take the black passport and hop away from this country. With National, we had overpopulation in this country and we didn't service them at all well. So that's our immigration policy.
Kia ora, thank you, Anne. Moving on to Panji.
Thank you. I'll share a story with you. So within our caucus, you know, we have different groups. This is based on various interests that we have. Like I'm the spokesperson for research, science and innovation. Coming from scientific background, I'm a part of the economic, you know, kind of group. So that is our opportunity to share ideas and, you know, come up with different policies that we, you know, announce. So we also have a Maori group within our caucus. And this was when I was a brand new member of parliament after 2014 election. I decided to, and we wanted to do photos for all these different groups because we were doing some brochures. So I decided to go and have a photo with my Maori colleagues. You know, that photo went out in the Maori brochure, and later on my Maori colleagues started getting phone calls asking, who is this Maori MP? They were asking about me. So talking about my relationship, you know, as you said, personally for me, Treaty of Waitangi and the Tangata Whenua. And another thing I want to share with you is that when I was a kid growing up in India, I actually borrowed a book from library. And the title of that book was Maori Villages. And, you know, I read about boiling water pools and Maori villages and all those things. So when I came to New Zealand, when I was, you know, just landed here in New Zealand, I really wanted to go and find some Maori villages and see some boiling water pools. So I went to Rotorua. So it looks like there is definitely some kind of connection between me and our Maori people here that I'm getting this question on this panel. So obviously, Treaty of Waitangi is important to us. I would say that we should be really proud, as Kiwis, because we have a very unique outlook, which is very different from other countries, this Pākeha and Maori outlook. And each and every legislation that goes through the House, Treaty of Waitangi is taken into consideration. And I think that is a good thing, that, there is a respect that's there, Pākeha and Maori, and we take those, the Treaty of Waitangi into consideration in each and every legislation. And I'm also mindful that we are becoming a very, very multicultural country, but we should never forget where our roots are. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you, Paramjit. And lastly, Priyanka.
Thank you. I think my question was about allyship, but I actually wanted Golriza's question, so I'm going to answer both in one. But also she stole my thunder with the FGM bill. But anyway, yes, so it's absolutely possible. And I was going to point to the FGM bill as
detail, because I had no time.
No, as well, I was just pointing to it as evidence of allyship across the House. But also, I mean, in a way, it's kind of sad because, the public only see the most adversarial parts of Parliament. There's so much more to it, particularly where on select committees we work together to finesse legislation or make it the best piece of legislation possible. And that was my second point was, I forgot the actual name of the bill, but it was about the underage marriage. It was actually Joe Hayes' members' bill around closing that loop where parental consent is needed for 16 and 17-year-olds who get married. One of the things that I actually talked about in my master's thesis on forced marriage in New Zealand. And so to be, to have worked on that issue from the NGO sector, presented to select committees previously, and then to sit on the Justice Select Committee when that bill was pulled from the ballot, and to work with colleagues from across the House, using the experiences of young women I worked with to get them to see what some of the loopholes were that we needed to change and get them to change their vote, was incredibly powerful, because that's the kind of stuff that I'm there for. But that also speaks to the allyship that is possible when, women of color, people get together and we share the context that have taken us to Parliament, because that's what we're there for. We're there to use our experience to change things to benefit the lives of people at the end of the day. And so I think those are just a couple of examples of the ways in which we work together across the House. But I think it boils down to individuals as well, like in every other space. There are some people that you can work with and some people that you struggle to work with, frankly. So it's not necessarily the party alignment. Yeah, but I think a few different factors that play into it, but also examples where we can do that well.
Kia ora. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I will now pass on to Rachel for wrapping up the webinar.
Thank you. Thank you all. It's been fascinating listening to all your responses to our questions. I know we are short of time, so one final question as we wrap up. You may have a long career ahead of you, or you might step off politics after this elections, I don't know. In either case, what would you like your lasting legacy to be in New Zealand politics? Shall I start with Paramjit, please?
Yeah, so as a scientist, I am a big advocate for the scientific community. I really want to make a difference for our researchers, our scientific community. One thing that I have taken up in this term, which I'll share because there's not much time, I'll just share one thing. That is, I am advocating for biotech legislation to be, biotech laws to be changed. This is a legislation which is called the HESNO Act, the Hazardous Substances and New Organism Act, which in my view is causing a lot of obstruction for our biotech sector to flourish here. So our Crown Research Institutes, they do some really good work. This work can help us combat climate change that we talk about. And I really believe that technology and science is the answer. And also for the sector to flourish here so that we can create more higher paying jobs. Australia has already changed their legislation, and I don't want any scientists that are here that are in that field moving out to other countries, because those countries are providing opportunities to these scientists to do what they want to do. So I want those opportunities to be available for our scientists here, retaining our scientists, providing them the opportunities, changing legislations where we know it's causing disruption or hindrance for our scientists to take their work forward. I know some scientists are, collaboration is a good thing, but some scientists are collaborating with other scientists in other countries only because our legislations here does not allow them to take their work to the next step. So I don't want that to be the case. I want to promote collaborations, but it shouldn't be only because our legislations are not allowing them to do their work here. So yes, fighting for the scientific community, biotech laws, the laws that govern biotech in New Zealand must be changed.
Thank you. Anne, what would you like your lasting legacy to be?
I want to be seen as someone who has contributed and learned from politics. I may be stepping off the national politics, but my work in community and grassroots will continue. Injury prevention will continue. Voicing women's issues will continue. And I want to be a grandmother, so I want to be traveling as soon as they open the borders to see my grandchildren and hug them and my daughter. So yeah, good luck to everybody.
That's lovely, Anne. Priyanka.
Thanks. I kind of feel like I've only just got started. So thinking about a legacy feels a little bit disingenuous in a sense. But there's quite a bit that I want to do within the ethnic community space. So some of the violence against women, prevention of violence work that I mentioned. But also I spoke about multiculturalism in my maiden speech, and what does that really mean for us, and where do we fit in New Zealand? Issues around the fact that people say, and I believe that we can lead the world in this, and the fact that we have Te Tiriti o Waitangi as a document that maps in a sense how we could do that, but then also teasing that sort of going into that a little bit further. We're not tangata whenua, are we tangata tiriti? But then what about the marginalization that we face? So lots of issues there, but I also feel that our diversity, we need to leverage that better in a sense, or value it better, but also use it better, because these communities are our bridge when it comes to foreign affairs and trade, and I don't feel we do that well enough. Apart from that, one of the issues I'm really passionate about is food security in New Zealand. Disproportionately affects women because it's been exacerbated, or the spotlight has been shone on it by COVID. So COVID hasn't created these inequities that we feel, that we see, but I feel that it has highlighted a lot of them. And food security is one. We talk about homelessness, but it's so interlinked with food insecurity in New Zealand. So that's an issue that I've been looking at and talking to the Auckland City Mission and their collective of food distribution agencies about. And it's something that I have raised within our caucus more recently as well, and one that I really want to work on and sink my teeth into if I'm back in Parliament post-October 17th.
Thank you. And Goldra's, over to you.
Yeah, kia ora. I don't think I can escape, nor would I want to. No matter what I do, I'll still accidentally have made history as the first ever refugee MP. So I do value that, and I hope that means that there'll be more and more different kinds of marginalised women and candidates who can look to that and run in all sorts of fields. But if I was going to look at why I came into politics and into Parliament, it would be my human rights expertise that I thought I was, bringing, more than just my face and my story, and the kind of values that I value in the human rights framework, which is that they are universal. We all have them, not because we're the good refugee or because we're moral or we had our children in wedlock or whatever else, but because we are human. And that they're indivisible. So I want New Zealand to come to a point where we value social, cultural and economic rights in the same way that we value civil and political rights, and kind of provide that baseline as an obligation of government, that we do provide baseline high quality public education, public healthcare, public housing, so that we are a truly egalitarian society. I really want us to have a constitutional conversation and safeguard our democracy, but that might be something that's more of a 20-year conversation. At the moment, I have a strengthening democracy members bill, so hopefully we'll get big money out of politics and we'll stop seeing all the SFO charges against, let's face it, we've had 3 in the past term. So it's about strengthening democracy and human rights for me.
Thank you. Thank you all. It's with great reluctance that I'm going to have to draw this conversation to a close. I feel we've just started, and I feel we could just keep going on and on. But I know there is another debate coming up, and I know that the audience would want to attend that. So let me start by saying thank you to the panelists. You've taken time off your schedules, which I'm sure busy schedules at this time of the election cycle, and to join us today on the webinar. There's also feedback from the audience who say, thank you all. Again, such valuable conversations as with last night's conversation. This is what we need all year round. Yes, perhaps we shouldn't keep it only to the election cycle. Thank you for allowing us to ask you intrusive questions and provocative questions, and for your candid thoughts and responses. We may all not have the same views, but that is the beauty of democracy. And that's what makes it so precious, that we all can carry these different views and still be here together. My thanks also to the audience who have joined us today, and those who joined us yesterday as well, for being engaged, responsive, and for being demanding. Not just in this webinar, but also in politics more generally. It is your genuine interest in issues that affect us all as a country that holds politicians to such high standards, and we mustn't give up on that. So going by the quality of thoughtful and thought-provoking discussions we've had yesterday and today, all I can say is I know you're going to listen to the leaders' debate, which starts shortly, but I have to say they have a hard act to follow. Good night, everybody, and be safe. Ka kite.